Okay, so it's part 2 of lesson 3. So what we're going to do is go back to our Word document. I'm going to select everything, just hit Control A, and I'm going to copy all of this code. And then I'm going to go to my PHP Storm application. So you can open up PHP Storm and open up your PHP gaming site if you don't already have it open. And I'm going to right-click my project, and I'm going to make a new PHP file. I'll just call it games. I'll call it game titles.php. Name that isn't really important. Change my title to say game titles, and I'm just going to paste in all the content. All right, so we'll paste in all the work we did in our Word document. There's a lot of white space here. So I'm going to take most of the white space out. Just so it's a little easier to read. I also have one issue. These quotes on my select, they're kind of angled. I need to retype those. I think the font I used in the Word document kind of broke them. So I'm just going to replace those quotes on the select statement. Oops. I will upload the completed version of this. Okay, Ariel, yeah, everything will be on YouTube later. And we've also got a slight quote problem here. Again, my single quotes are angled. So I'm going to delete them and replace those. I'll retype those single quote characters. So they're not slanted anymore. Oops. Okay, so there's our completed code. I'll just go over it. I will upload it. So we're connecting to the AWS database. We'll have to change the DB name, username, and password in our code. We're going to run a select query in the games table. We're going to link our connection and query together and then execute the query. We're going to fetch all the results and store them in a variable. And then we're going to loop through the list of games and output the game titles only. And then we're going to disconnect from the database. I will put all this online if that's easier. Anybody needs it. Give me a second and I will put the link in the chat. So here's everything you need. It's just the same version we did here. I've just sort of cleaned up the code a little bit. So in order to try this out, you'll need to make sure that you connect to the VPN with OpenVPN or TunnelBlick. Make sure it tells you you're connected. And on line 10, you need to put in your database name and username, which are the same. And put in your AWS password as well. Once we've put our credentials in, we should be able to try this page out. And if it works properly, it should print all of the game titles across the screen. So make sure you start your XAMPP server. I don't need my MySQL server really anymore. So now I'm going to go to my local host. I'll open up PHP Gaming, game titles.php. I'll put the link that you need in the chat. So this is what it gives me. It just prints out one at a time. There's no formatting, doesn't look very good, but it just prints out our So I've put the link in the chat that you need. It'll be the same as mine, but you won't have the :800. To run it from your XAMPP or MAMP, it should just be localhost/phpgaming/game titles. So this is like the simplest possible example we could do of fetching data from the database, reading it out, and then displaying it in our browser with PHP and HTML. So again, you can grab the version of the file here from the paste of code link in the chat, update the credentials, connect to the database, save your file, and then you should be able to try it out. And it should print out Okay, Christopher. So something isn't quite right. So we must be missing something. What you are possibly missing is before line 13, you may be missing the semicolon or a quote on line 10. So check your quotes on line 10. And that line 10, your database connection ends with a semicolon. So even though it says the error is here, the other thing is you may still have, when I pasted this, it had angled quotation marks. So I've retyped those. You'll notice these quotation marks are perfectly vertical. Again, you can always use or check. You got it? What was the issue?
Could not find the driver.
Couldn't find the driver.
It's a fatal error.
Okay, right. I see it. We looked at this last week. You had this issue last week, correct? Yeah, it's because we talked about this last week because you're running the files from your E drive, and the driver that is needed for PDO, it's on your C drive. So your two options are either you're going to need to use your C drive, you'll need to install the XAMPP on your C drive, or your other option, Chris, is rather than using localhost, you can upload things to AWS using FTP. And you can run it from AWS. Hannah, can you give me a bit more information, please? Colton, I'll come to your question in just a second.
Thank you. I'm going to use FileZilla.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Chris. Okay, so Hannah, you may be missing the $ here. It looks like from reading your error, there's no $. Oh, the issue may be, Hannah, the quotation marks. When we copied and pasted from Word, in Word, it didn't interpret the quotation marks properly. I should have used, so you notice the quotes are kind of on an angle. So when we copied and pasted this from Word, it gave me quotation marks that were angled. So I deleted them and retyped them. You can see the quotes are now totally vertical. I'll put this in the chat for you. You can just copy and paste directly. That should fix that issue, I think. Okay, Colton, if you have no games, rather than insert them directly, you can use the pages we created last week. So if you go to the link would be, the URL is game details. And Colton, I'll put this in the chat. This loads the form we built last week. And we use this form to create some games. So if there's nothing in your database, you'll need to save some games here. Okay, so right, so if I go back to my game titles now, right, whatever I add through my form goes in the database, and then when this page runs, it queries out, it retrieves whatever's in there. So if you have the pages from last week, you can just fill out your form and add a few games to the database. Okay, Hannah. Okay, so it tried to connect, but it failed. You've got your credentials. So Hannah, that suggests you may not be connected to the VPN, I'm guessing. Are you on, trying to see. So Hannah, you're on Windows? Yeah. So when you get that connection failure, if you're sure the credentials are correct, yep, simple fix. We all do it. I'm going to do it too, no problem. Every one of us is going to forget to turn the VPN on. I did right today, right? When I tried to load my lab page. First thing I did, I got a connection error. So yeah, if you see this, so I'll just go back to my lab, right? When I loaded it before, if I'm disconnected from the VPN, oh, actually I used a local database for this. But if I go try and load my game titles, right, when I'm disconnected from the VPN, it's going to try to connect. We get a sense something's wrong because it's not loading. And eventually the connection's going to time out and I'm going to get an error, which will be the same error that Hannah mentioned in the chat. Right? Connection attempt failed. The connected party didn't respond, even though I know my credentials are right. So connect to the VPN and boom. Right, now I'm connected. It'll just take a second. Now my page loads. So this kind of thing is going to happen to all of us. No problem. Easy fix. So we have a working page. It's kind of crappy. Doesn't look very good. So I want to look at the most complicated part of the code, which is here. This is the for each games as V. So in this case, right, games is our list, and then we're using V to represent one game. So as we go around, we're printing out the title. What will happen if I had this code on line 24? So I've got echo $V title. What if I put in a capital T? If I refresh my page, what do you think will happen? There's three possibilities. It's going to, number one, it will print out all the game titles the way it did previously. Number two, we get a blank screen. Number three, we get an error. Which do you think will happen if I use a capital T here? Will we get the list of games? Will we get nothing? Will we get an error? What's your prediction? Tanya thinks error. Tanya thinks error. Any other guesses? Error, blank, or game titles? Tanya, why do you predict we'll get an error this way?
Because we don't have a title, like with
Right. Okay.
with the T.
Yeah, because we don't, there's no column in the database with a capital T title. So David, yeah, you're saying if you remember it being, wasn't case sensitive, but you're not sure about variables. Okay, well, let's try it. So if I refresh, it says undefined index. So it means it doesn't, exactly what Tanya said, doesn't recognize title with a capital T. Because in our database, title is lowercase. So if we want to display it, it has to match exactly. And that includes the casing. So PHP variables are case sensitive. The commands are not, but the variables are, which is a little confusing. So this has got to match exactly the case in the database. So here's our first page, first of many pages we're going to write in this course where we're selecting and displaying some data from the database. It's pretty crude though, isn't it? Like it doesn't look very good. So what we want to do now is we're going to build a separate page. We're not really going to use this page in our gaming site. This was just for doing a really simple version of selecting and displaying data. What we actually want to do is look at how do we build something like this? How do we build a table, rows and columns? Okay, and we see data tables in web applications all the time. So knowing how to build them is critical. We'll look at a couple simple examples. Go here. I want to see the NHL hockey standings. So how's the data presented, right? There's a query running. It goes to the NHL database. It fetches the list of teams and all of the statistics. And it displays them in rows and columns, right? Column headings at the top that represent, and then we're using rows and individual columns or individual cells to represent the data. We might see this in web dashboards. So dashboards to manage websites. So here's a client site. I'll just log in. And so they have, training courses. That's what this business does. So we've got a grid, again, not very fancy, but it's just for the owner. I could probably make it look better. We've got rows and columns. So I'm writing a query and then displaying in rows and columns all of the data with actions users can take. I want to go to news items. Same thing. Well, nothing's showing here. Rows and table of rows and columns. Table of rows and columns. So we need to know, how do we write a query and then represent the data in some kind of HTML grid like this. So we're going to make a new page, but this time instead of just printing out the games this way, we want to format it like this, rows and columns, where we have not just the game titles, but the other information about the game as well. So I'm actually going to click Control A. I'm going to copy everything in my game titles page because a lot of this code is the same. The connection, the query, everything up till here is going to be exactly the same. The only thing we're going to change is we're going to change the echo because we want to add some formatting. We want to kind of wrap or package our data inside of an HTML table. So instead of looking kind of like this, it looks more like this. So I'll go to my project. I'm going to make a new PHP file. We'll just call it games.php. I'm going to just delete everything here and paste in our code from the other page. So it's an exact copy. Instead of the title saying game titles, I'll just put in games. Because we're not only going to show the title, we're going to show everything. So these steps, these are all still going to happen. We're going to connect to the database. We're going to execute the exact same query. Select star from games. We're going to link our connection and our query together, execute the query, store the results. Except before we start looping around, we need to create a table. We want to create an HTML table to format the game's data in a grid. So I'm going to echo out a table tag. And then I'm going to echo a table heading. So our grid, we want to have 3 columns. We want the title. We want the release year. And we want the rating. So this line 23, this goes before our loop. Why would we create the table before the loop? A common mistake when we're learning this is people make the table inside the loop. Why should the table get created before? There's the one line of code we've added. So this goes before our for each loop. How come? David is right. If we put it inside the table, every game is going to have the heading row. We only want the heading row once up at the top of the table. Right? Here's my heading row. So it should go at the top. We don't want the header repeated for every record. We also need to close the table. Notice I've opened my table tag. There's no closing table tag right now. Where should the closing table tag go? Should it go before our for each loop, inside the for each loop, or after the for each loop? When do we want to end the table? Yeah, Michael and Felix, right. So after we're done displaying all the rows, so we'll close the table. So down here, we'll just close it. So now in here, we're going to keep the code we have, but we need to add to it. Because right now, all this does is print out the title. We need a couple of other HTML tags around this so that we can display the title, the year, and the rating like this. So what 2 tags do we need to add as kind of like wrapping around our title? We need some other HTML here. How do we create rows and columns with HTML? You guys probably did this a little bit with Scott. last semester in your fundamentals class. We need one tag to create a row and one tag to create a new cell or column. Okay, or you didn't do any tables. Okay. Well, here's a clue. This TH, it stands for table heading, right? So we've got 3 headings. Title heading, a release year heading, and a rating. So down here, anybody want to guess? Okay. So we have 2 tags that start with a T. So I'm going to put in a single quote and a T. What do you suppose it would be for a row? We want to create it. Yeah, David, you got it. We want a new TR. This will create a row. And Felix, TD stands for table data. So TR is a row and TD is a column or a cell. So for each game, we're going to create a new row. So we're going to use, so TR creates a new row, a new table row. TD creates a new table cell or column. It stands for table data. So for each game, we're going to create a row, create a column, and then inside the first column, we're going to print out the title. So that would give us something like this here. We've got a new row and a new table cell. What would we do after we print out the title? What do we want to do next? Remember, our table's got 3 columns: title, release year, and rating. So this will print a row, create a column, and put the title. Okay, do we want to close both tags or just one of them right here? Right. Then we want to end the first column. So what do we do after we end the first column? Right? So we've printed out the first column. Do we want to end the row yet? How many columns are in the table? Right, we've got 3 columns. 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, David, exactly. So now we're going to, I'll put it on a new line just so it's a little easier to see. So now we're going to add our second column. That's right, Michael. So every row, every set of TR tags has 3 TDs inside. So what value will go in our second column? We want to print the title in the first column. What value do we put in our second column? You got it. And we'll type it exactly the way it exists in our database, as Tanya pointed out earlier. So it's release year in camel case. And then we're going to close the second column. So this is going to now end the first column, open the second one, and print out the release year in column number 2. And then we want to do the same thing with our third column, where we want to print the rating. So we're opening a row, creating 3 columns, and inserting our PHP values from the database, whoops, I missed it, into each one. What do we do after we finish the third column? Michael, you got it. So now we can close the row. So every game creates a new row, and then inside the row we create one column, two columns, three columns, and then we close the row. Okay. So let's try this out. So I'll put this full code in the chat. We'll try it out. So now I'm going to go to games.php. Now it's kind of crude. It's not beautiful, but we have a functional table, right? All our titles are aligned, our release year, and our rating. Everything is lined up. All the values are in the proper columns. If we view the page source, right, we don't see any of the PHP, but you can see for each game, we've got a row, first column with the title, second column with the year, third column with the rating, and then we end our row. And this is going to repeat in a loop until we finish printing out and displaying all of the records in our table. So this is exactly what happens on any page. Oh, didn't mean to close my browser, meant to close my tab. This is what we're doing on any page that shows a grid of data. There's an HTML table with a loop printing out rows and columns until all the data is displayed. So we're doing it here on our game site. You're going to do the same thing in your lab, except the data is going to be your family displayed in a table. Okay, so this is a super common feature. Virtually every web application will have tabular data, a grid of rows and columns, where we're showing a list of data in some way. Now, we don't have to use tables to display our data. We're going to explore a few other ways of formatting the data as well, but tables are really common. We see stuff like this all the time. And in your lab, you're going to get a chance to practice this. Next week, I'm going to give you assignment 1 and building a similar page that queries the database and displays records in a table. It's also going to be one part of the assignment, but we'll talk about that next week. I understand this is new, so it may look a little unfamiliar. Don't worry, we're going to practice with this quite a bit. Does anybody have any questions about our page or what's going on here and what we're doing? Or is this starting to make a little bit of sense in terms of what you know about HTML and what we've learned so far about PHP? Okay, that's good, Colton. Okay, thanks, David. Now we're going to do one more thing with this page now that we have it working. Okay. We just want to make it look a little better. So we could write our own CSS, but that takes time. I'm a crappy CSS developer. All of you are much better at it than me. And this is where Bootstrap comes in. So I've used the Bootstrap CSS framework. You'll notice, look at the difference in our table, right? Our table, we've got no kind of separation. It's all squished together. Whereas when I apply the Bootstrap CSS library and add a few classes to my table, it's 100% scale. I get alternating colors. You get a different font. Just looks better. So we're going to go and grab Bootstrap and add it to our project. Okay, so I'm going to show you where to get it. There's a link on Blackboard. So this will just take us about 5 minutes to implement, really quick. We're not writing our own CSS. We're going to use Bootstrap CSS, add it to the project, and then we'll take a break. So in your lesson 3 folder, there's an item here. It says Bootstrap CSS Links. I'll also put it in the chat if that saves you some time. So I'm just going to right click on the link. Oops. And I'll choose Save Link As. And I'm going to download Bootstrap into my PHP gaming project. So just go ahead and download the zip file. And we'll need to extract it and then kind of move it around. So download the file into your PHP gaming folder, and then you get this zip file here. So I'm just going to right click it. I'll extract it here. And it creates a folder called Bootstrap 5 Beta 1 dist for distribution for public use. This is open source CSS. Anyone can use it. Very widely used across the internet today. So again, just download the file into your PHP gaming and extract it to a folder. And then we just need to move a couple of the folders inside. I don't want this folder called Bootstrap 5 Beta 1 dist. I'm just going to open that. There's 2 folders in here, JS and CSS. I'm just going to move these into my PHP gaming. So I'm just going to highlight them, and I could cut and paste, or I could just drag and drop. If I just drag them, click and drag into PHP gaming, my Bootstrap folder, you can copy and paste. My Bootstrap folder is empty. So I don't need, and now you can see here's my CSS and JS. I don't really need the Bootstrap zip and the Bootstrap folder anymore. I wanted the CSS and the JavaScript that was inside. So I'll just delete those 2 now. So now inside PHP gaming, I have all of these CSS files and utilities that come with Bootstrap. And I have some supporting JavaScript for things like CSS animations. We don't really need the JavaScript, I don't think. We're really just interested in, primarily in this file, the minified, compressed style sheet. So I'll just show you quickly what Bootstrap looks like, and then we'll add it into this page. So you can read the documentation on getbootstrap.com. So again, originally this was created by developers at Twitter. So it's got all kinds of, containers for building responsive sites. And it's got all these components. So for example, it comes with like sample navigation bars. So if we want a nav bar that looks like this, Bootstrap just says, here, just copy this HTML into your file. If we want to do things like alerts to display messages, it has classes. Like, do you want a blue message, a green message, a red error message? It's got different styles for buttons. So it comes with all these pre-built styles we can use. Drop downs or lists. So we're going to use some of these classes to kind of make our site look a little better without us having to write any of our own CSS. So all I need to do to use the style sheet is I just need to link it into the header, and then we can add a few classes. So I'm going to scroll up to the top of my games. I'm just going to add a link. So I'll add rel equals style sheet, type equals text CSS, and my href, I'm just going to link to css/bootstrap.min.css. Nothing earth-shattering here. I know everyone knows how to link an external style sheet into a web page. I've just put the code in the chat for you. So I'm going to use a few of the classes that come with Bootstrap that are used for formatting tables. If I go back here and look at some of their components, so they've got a description. They've got some different classes. So they have a table class that will look something like this. And then they have some other variants like table primary, table secondary, that will give kind of different colors. So maybe I want, the alternating gray. So you could use any one of these classes. I'm going to use the table secondary class. Or I've got table striped. I actually like this one. It gives alternating colors. And I can use table hover for this effect. I'm going to add these. And we just add a class definition to our table tag. So I'll just refresh my page right now. We'll take a break in just a second. Already the font changes just by adding the style sheet. You notice we get a different font. We're not using Times anymore. And we can override this font. We're not stuck with Bootstrap's font. So in my table, I'm going to add some Bootstrap classes. Table. That'll make it 100% width. I'll use table striped, which will alternate the background colors. I'm also going to use table hover. So if I roll my mouse over the different rows, the rows will be highlighted as I move. We're going to use Bootstrap table classes to style the table. Okay, so I'm modifying my table tag. I'll also put it in the chat. And you could play around. You could use other table classes. If you want, you can experiment. You can make your table look however you want. So now when I refresh, boom, we get 100% scale. I get alternating background colors, and I get this nice rollover effect as I move. So super simple, free way to add some basic styling to an application. And most production applications will write our own custom CSS on top of Bootstrap. We use Bootstrap for some of the basic layout because it has a grid and column system. It allows us to do responsive design easily, but we can override it. So for example, in last year's class, in this course last year, we used Bootstrap to make it mobile responsive. Right, to get my nice little drop-down menu. It should be working and it isn't. But so I used the Bootstrap table, but we customized some of the colors and some of the other things here. So eventually our game site is going to look kind of like this. We use Bootstrap for some basic CSS. We can color and style the buttons. But it's a good starting point. You don't have to use Bootstrap. You can leave the CSS out if you want. You can write all your own CSS, up to you. But as someone who's not very skilled with CSS, Bootstrap's a good solution for me. I only know enough CSS just to be dangerous. And that's not our focus in this class. So I don't want to spend a lot of time doing my own CSS work. Okay, it is 12:52 by my count. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to upload all my code to GitHub. So if you need anything we've done today, you can reference it. We will take a pause here. Bootstrap is open source, so it is not plagiarism at all. Absolutely, you can use anything in Bootstrap. No problem. Good question, David. Okay, we will take a pause here. We'll come back in 10 minutes.